Alright guys, welcome back. My name is Randall. This is the McClures. We react, review, we make fun of, we laugh at stuff over here. Links are down in the description if you'd like to help support the channel. If you don't want to support, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I'm really disappointed in you. It's very sad. It's very sad. But you could always shop McClures.com. Everybody likes to buy stuff for themselves. ShopMcClures.com. We sell quality American products over there if you want to go check it out. We got all kinds of stuff. Get some car soap. Buy something that you need. Buy something that you want. Buy a gift for somebody. Alright, if you guys haven't heard RFK speak before, he does have a unique voice. I'm not sure what medical issue that he has that causes him to speak the way he does. So you do have to listen sometimes to be able to piece together everything that he's saying. But even though politically I don't agree with him because well, I don't know, he still thinks he's a Democrat, but he's right about a lot of stuff and a very smart guy. So everybody on Rumble, we appreciate you tapping in. This is R.F. Kennedy Jr.'s town hall on News Nation. So mainstream media won't give him any play, but he did do this town hall on News Nation. I want to say this was last week. I don't know that for sure, but I have been meaning to get to it at least for a few days, so it's been around for a second. Let's jump in. Let's see what they're talking about. Let's see what they are talking about. Actually, we don't even need that up. We'll just make it fat and big for you.
I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I'm running for President of the United States. This campaign is about protecting our environment. I've been fighting corporate corruption my entire life, and about safeguarding our children from toxic chemicals and drugs, about healing the divide. I'm running to bring our country together.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., can he capture the magic of Camelot?
My father and my uncle had a vision for America.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
A vision of racial harmony, of peace in the world, and of honest government.
Or will his own controversial positions stop him?
I'm accused of passing misinformation. On the side that shows that autism is caused by vaccines, there's over 100 studies. Wi-Fi radiation does all kinds of bad things, including causing cancer. There seems to be an almost frantic need to discredit me. I would urge people to listen to my own words.
Tonight, live across America, we welcome you to the RFK Jr. Town Hall.
They do try to disparage him, and they've been doing it for a long time.
Good evening, and thank you.
He is the most public, well-known, outspoken voice against Big Pharma, and they hate him. Therefore, all their lackeys, meaning anybody that they pay, also hates him. Interesting. All right, let's get into it.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Vargas. Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has his sights set on something that hasn't been done in modern U.S. history, beating the sitting president for his party's nomination for the White House. And so far, he's off to a solid start, polling at 15% against Joe Biden in a recent Emerson College poll. His connection to what is akin to American political royalty is right there in the name. RFK Jr.'s statements, however, on issues like vaccines and public health have critics calling him a conspiracy theorist, and others asking if he is the right person for the most important job in our nation, possibly the world. Still, Kennedy believes it's his ability to take on that established power that American voters want. And that's why tonight is about you, the audience. It is your chance to ask questions and hear directly from Kennedy about the issues that matter most to you, live and unedited. And no topic is off limits. We've brought together Democratic and independent voters right here in Chicago, as well as in New Hampshire and South Carolina, the first states to cast their primary ballots in 2024. But first, everyone, please welcome me in joining Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to the stage.
Thank you.
That is a warm Chicago welcome. Let's get this part out of the way. Your voice is raspy. Why don't you explain to our audience why?
I had a very, very strong voice till I was 46 years old. It was unusually strong. And I was, even at that time, I was making a lot of my income doing public speaking, and I could speak to large halls without any amplification. And then in 1996, when I was 42 years old, I got struck with a disease, a neurological disease, an injury called spasmodic dystonia, and it makes my voice tremble. And I actually, at the time, I didn't know what was wrong with it. But when I would go on TV, people would write me letters and say, "You have spasmodic dystonia, and you should see Dr. Blitzer, who is the physician who was most famous for treating it." And I ultimately went to see him, and he confirmed that I had the diagnosis. So it makes it. I think it makes it problematical for people to listen to me. I cannot listen to myself on TV. I will never listen to this broadcast, and I won't listen to any. So I feel sorry for you guys having to listen to me.
All right.
But I'll say one other thing, that my throat was much worse, and I went to Japan with Cheryl about 6 months ago and had a novel surgery that they only do in Kyoto. And it made my voice much better, which you probably won't believe, but it was much worse than this before.
I was actually going to say that, not to seem like you're totally jumping on the information he already told you. But I noticed, not today, I didn't notice it today. I noticed it might have been on the Joe Rogan podcast, because I've heard him give a speech, previously. And he was much harder to understand than he was on the Joe Rogan podcast. I did notice that. So interesting.
Before. So.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of questions tonight for you from our audience. Let's get started. Before that, though, I want to say you're asking Democratic voters in this room and across the country to do something that hasn't been done in 167 years in this country, to vote out a president of their own party. Not to mention, replace him with somebody who hasn't even held elective office. Why should they take that chance?
Well, I'm running because I feel like my party has lost its way. That the values that my uncle represented, my father represented when they were Democrats, have been neglected, let's say. And I want to try to bring the Democratic Party back to those values, the values that were, in favor of focus on the middle class in this country, focused on labor, on racial, on the well-being of minorities in this country, focused on the environment, particularly on civil liberties and freedom of speech, which the party has seems to have forgotten about. And the party traditionally was anti-war as well. My uncle, President Kennedy, was asked by his best friend what he wanted on his epitaph, on his gravestone, and he said he kept the peace. He said the principal job of an American president is to keep the country out of war. And the Democratic Party has represented those views since its inception. And I think, particularly what we're doing now in the Ukraine is a departure from that. And I don't mean that, I'm very, very sympathetic to the Ukrainian people, and I am not sympathetic to Putin, who invaded the Ukraine brutally and illegally and unnecessarily. But we have neglected many, many opportunities to settle this war peacefully. And by the way, my son, Connor, went over to the Ukraine and fought for a special forces unit. He was a machine gunner, and he fought in the Kharkiv offensive. And so I, myself and my family are very, very sympathetic to the Ukrainian people. But I think the way that we have conducted the war is bad for the Ukrainian people, is terrible for the Ukrainian people.
This is a story that's been very much in the headlines this week with the failed rebellion in Russia by Putin's own mercenary henchman, Yevgeny Prigozhin. The world held its breath because Russia has more nuclear weapons than any country on the planet. And I want to take us to our first question from Tiani in Manchester, which is about Russia. Tiani?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I have heard and read that you believe that Russia has acted in good faith towards trying to resolve the war in Ukraine. And I'm wondering if that is actually your position, and how would you bring peace to the region without emboldening Putin and threatening democratic self-government around the world?
Well, that is a bit of a misstatement of what I said. What I said was that in April of 2022, the war began on February 24th, 2022. In April, there was a peace outreach by Putin and Zelensky. And they actually signed a peace agreement and at that time. And Boris Johnson was dispatched by the White House to sabotage that agreement. The Russians were acting in good faith. After signing that agreement, they were actually withdrawing troops from the area around Kiev. So it was clear that they were operating in good faith at that point, and we were not operating in good faith. We should be trying to settle this war through diplomacy. Since then, there have been 350,000 Ukrainian kids that have been killed, and we have turned that nation into a proxy war between a proxy war between Russia and the United States. And by the way, we were told this was a humanitarian exercise. If it was humanitarian, it means reducing bloodshed and shortening the conflict. But when President Biden was asked, why are we over there? He said, for regime change of Vladimir Putin. In April of 2021 or 2022, his defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, said that the reason for America's presence in the Ukraine is to degrade the Russian military and exhaust its capacity to operate anywhere in the world. That is the opposite of a humanitarian mission. That is a mission about a war of attrition in which the people who are dying are Ukrainians.
But
And
when you say you would negotiate a solution, what does that look like? Do you award President Putin of Russia part of Ukraine?
We know what the solution would look like because the Russians have agreed to the solution twice. Once they agreed to the Minsk Accords, and the Minsk Accords, which were agreed to by Germany, by France, and by Russia, maintained Donbass as part of the Ukraine. By the way, the Donbass voted to leave the Ukraine 90 to 10, 90% to 10%.
Are you talking about the elections last year?
No, the earlier elections, and Putin refused to take them. So Putin did not. But let me finish this. The Donbass or the Minsk Accords, which all those countries agreed on, and then in 2019. Zelensky ran for president for the first time. He's a comedian and actor with no political experience. He won on a peace platform with 70% of the vote. His campaign was, I will sign them and ratify the Minsk Accords if I'm elected. And as soon as he got elected, he pivoted. Why? Because of US pressure from the neocons, from Victoria Nuland and the neocons in the White House. They did not want peace. And because of pressure from ultranationalists.
That is a 100% facts. I don't know what your guys' stance on the Ukrainian-Russian conflict is, but this is 100% an American-created issue. We wanted the war, and we got it. We wanted it, and we got it. So, he is 100% facts on that. 100% facts on that. I debate people all the time on this because everybody's first thing is, oh, support Ukraine, support Ukraine. No. From my understanding of the situation, Putin's in the right here. You may not like Putin. You may think he's a horrible dictator, blah, 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 blah. But in this situation, we provoked it. We asked for it, and we got it.
Was within the Ukraine who said they were going to kill him if he signed the accords.
But if you negotiate with Putin right now and get him to stop his invasion, I mean, I know you said you're not defending Putin, but I mean, he's an accused war criminal. He poisons his enemies and imprisons his enemies. He's an autocrat. So if you award him part of Ukraine, what message are you sending to dictators and autocrats around the world who are looking to neighboring countries thinking, hey, I want some of that?
Rule number 3, you can't get rich slow. When I owned 100 houses.
When my uncle was president and his military apparatus wanted him to go to war with Vietnam, with Laos, with Cuba, with the Soviet Union during the Berlin crisis in 1982, he said, you have to put yourself into the shoes of your adversary if we're going to have peace. You have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the adversary and see the world from their perspective and recognize their legitimate security concerns. Now, we have, through a series of provocations, including unilaterally walking away from the 2 medium-range nuclear missile treaties with Russia, which we all signed, and President Trump and President Obama walked away from those. We promised in 1992 that we would, after the Russians made a huge concession to us of leaving 400,000 troops out of Germany, allowing us to consolidate East and West Germany under NATO control, which was an adversary army to them. And they said, the one thing we want from you is that you will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And Secretary of State Baker said at that time, famously, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. Since then, we have moved it 1,000 miles to the east and 14 countries, and we put Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland right near Russia's border.
Facts.
When Russia put nuclear missiles in Cuba, which is farther away than we now have, to Moscow, we would have invaded if they hadn't withdrawn them. My uncle was president then. We would have gone in. And my uncle knew why the Russians had done that. He did it because they did it. Khrushchev did it because we had put nuclear missile systems, Jupiter systems, in Italy and in Turkey. And my uncle, my father, met with Ambassador Dobrynin secretly and made a secret deal. If you remove your missiles now, we will take ours out of Turkey. So, the Russians have been invaded 3 times through the Ukraine. The last time they were invaded, the Germans killed 1 out of every 7 Russians.
That's something to remember right there. The Russians have been invaded through Ukraine 3 times in their history. Makes the Ukrainian border kind of important to defending their country. Especially when the Germans last time killed that many Russians.
They destroyed all of it, 1/3 of Russia to rubble. They burned the fields. It's as if my uncle said this in his 1963 speech at American University. He said they destroyed the equivalent of destroying the entire part of the United States from the East Coast to Chicago. Imagine if all the wheat fields, all the forests were burned, all the cities reduced to rubble. That's what was done. They have a legitimate concern about us moving NATO into the Ukraine. We would never let them put missile systems in Canada or Mexico. We would invade if they did that. And we have to be able to put ourselves in their positions.
We have a lot of questions to get to, but you know that the vast majority of Democrats fully and consistently have supported President Biden on his support of Ukraine in this war. You seem to be out of step with the voters of the party that you're asking to vote.
That doesn't make it right, Elizabeth. That does not make it right.
That's why he's running.
We need to be a moral nation. We need to restore our moral authority around the world. If every Democrat is against me on that, I'm still going to say it. I'm going to tell people the truth. And our leadership.
And you think giving part of Ukraine to Putin is restoring our moral authority?
I didn't say giving part of the Ukraine to Putin. Putin agreed originally to leave Ukraine alone if we signed the agreement. So, Putin was not demanding any part of Ukraine, even though the ethnic Russians voted 90 to 10 in the Donbass to join Russia. He said no. Oh, I don't know what the negotiation would look like exactly, but I know what they agreed to before, and it was a reasonable agreement. They just did not want NATO to go into Ukraine, and we said we don't care. By the way, when we originally said that we were going to do this, George Kennan, who is the most important diplomat in American history, he was the architect of the containment policy after World War II. He is a deity in American statesmanship. He said, if you go into the Ukraine, you're going to force the Russians to have a violent response. William Perry, who was Bill Clinton's Secretary of State, said, if you go into the Ukraine with NATO, I'm going to resign because you are forcing the Russians to retaliate violently. And William Burns, who is now the head of the CIA, was then the US ambassador to the Soviet Union, said the same thing. He said, you cannot move NATO into the Ukraine because it is going to force the Russians to retaliate violently. And
so there you have it right there, folks. I mean, he just laid out 3 top-notch diplomatic strategists for foreign whatever, and they all knew what was going to happen. You know, you can't flick the back of the ear of a dictator repeatedly and never get a response. It's retarded. It's retarded. The whole thing is dumb. I mean, it's as plain as day. Plain as day. I don't know why everybody's not in agreement that this war is BS. It's clear that they closed down Afghanistan money-making pit. They needed to open up a new money-making pit. And seeming how they've been funneling money through Ukraine forever. And it hurts Putin, their archenemy. Why is Putin the archenemy? That's a good question. That is a very good question. And personally, I think Putin is the archenemy to the West, so to speak, because the West wants a global, one world, one religion, one blanket policy ruling the entire world. Russia wants to be Russia. They want to be Russia yesterday, tomorrow, in the future. They always want to be Russia. You can't knock them for that. You can't knock them for that. They want to be Russia. Let them be Russia. Nothing wrong with that. Let them be Russian. I don't see the problem. But he's the only Christian superpower, or super-ish enough power, to publicly stand up against the global agenda. And you can't really conquer the global agenda without the largest gas station country on the planet. So they kind of need to get rid of Putin and put somebody in there that can go along to get along, just like they did in Ukraine. Because if you don't know yet, this all started because our CIA implemented our own government into Ukraine. They're not elected democratically. It's not a democratic nation. We're not saving democracy by supporting Ukraine. He locks up clergy people. He puts political opponents in jail. He shuts down media. It's not a free democracy in Ukraine. This isn't what we're supporting, people. It's a U.S. installed regime doing our bidding. This isn't good for the Ukrainian people. This isn't helping Ukrainians at all. At all. Making my way downtown. Share your thoughts. What do you think?
he called it a red line. He said, if you cross that red line, Russia is going to have to go into the Ukraine. So all of us knew that. All of our diplomats knew that. And the comic book depiction that the American people have been told by their leadership. I want to tell you something. The seats that you're sitting on today, do you know who first had put those seats in here? The very seats you're sitting on. Donahue, Phil Donahue. Phil Donahue was the most important, the most popular daytime host. And do you know what happened to him at the height of his popularity? He told the truth about the Iraq war. He said there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. 2 days later, he lost his job. And that's why those seats are empty. So we have to, and now we all know he was right. So what I'm saying today, I know 10 years from now, everybody's going to understand this is the truth. We have been lied to by our press, by our government, and we need to start hearing the truth, and we need to stop paying attention to these comic book depictions that say there's bad guys and good guys, and America's always the good guy, and we never make mistakes. We have to understand there's nuance, there's complexity in our relationships, and we need to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of our adversaries if we're going to have true peace in the world, which we all want.
All right, this takes us to a question from Sandy Muller, a stay-at-home mom in Chicago.
Before Sandy Muller gets into her question, so I'm making my way downtown, chiming in on the Twitch chat. Says she's been desperate to talk, she or he, I don't know, desperate to talk about what Russians doing. No one takes me seriously on either side. That Russians run Tor sites, dark websites, selling American stolen IDs, and that Alexander Vinnick had the biggest one. Their hacks aren't changing anything in the roles. They observe. Oh, so you're saying the Russians are aware of who has faked and switched their identities? Is that what you mean? Do they have the records of the Michael to Michelle conversion? And we started a war with between Ukraine and Russia just to get Obama's Big Mike ID documents back. All right, it's identifying theft using non-voters' votes, falsifying, registering, manipulates the signature address affiliations of real voters. Oh, stealing the identity of people that don't vote in order to falsely register them as whatever party or whatever you want in order to get the numbers that you need for your outcome. Okay. Okay. Interesting take. Interesting take for sure. It's feasible. It's feasible. I could buy it. I could buy it. So they're saying if you guys didn't watch the 2000 Mules documentary, they're saying that that documentary made the mistake of blaming Americans for the fraud when a mass multi-state organized effort with tech hacks and manpower would clearly be a U.S. enemy operation. I mean, he would be motivated to get Trump out of there because obviously he can't do anything to Ukraine if Trump's in there, which is why he didn't do it the previous 4 years. This is feasible. This is a feasible argument. Okay. Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. That is feasible. Maybe I should add the chat back to the thing so people can see what you're saying.
Chicago might be interesting given what you just said.
Your father and uncle were heroes in the Democratic Party. Would they be considered Democrats today? And are you shocked by how you are being treated by the Democrats and their media?
I don't think they would be Democrats today.
I'm not happy about it, but I'm not shocked. I know, people get subsumed in orthodoxies. I believe that the values that I am trying to promote are the exact values that my father and my uncle would have promoted. And I've, written books about my family. I've studied them. I have, the more that I've studied my family, the more I've written and researched them, my uncle and my father, the more proud I am of them. And I have devoted my life to promoting the same kind of values that I think they promoted. And I'm trying to, one of my purposes in running is to remind the Democratic Party of, what we are supposed to represent and what we've always represented. And, people have said to me, why don't you run as an independent? Why don't you? And I say, because I'm a Democrat. This is who I am. This is my identity, but I want my party back. I want my party to be the party that I grew up in, the party of John Kennedy, the party of Robert Kennedy, the party of FDR and Harry Truman.
You say that you're a Democrat, but you're getting a lot of support from a lot of leading voices on the right, like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, former President Donald Trump. Many Democrats fear that you're a spoiler in the race, that you will damage President Biden in the primary and grease the skids for former President Trump to return to the Oval Office. This week, former President Trump said about you, Kennedy is smart and he's a common sense guy.
Now, this isn't scientific, but I did a poll around New York, and what people believed about the Constitution.
What kind of man do you think Donald Trump is?
Well, here's what I'm not going to do in this race. I'm not going to attack other people personally. I don't think it's good for our country. And I think, what I'm trying to do in this race is bring people together, is to try to bridge the divide between Americans. And guess what? When my dad died and we took this train ride from, this 7.5-hour train ride that was supposed to be 2 hours, I was with him when he died in Los Angeles, and then we brought his body from New York, Penn Station to Union Station and Washington, D.C. And it was a 2.5-hour ride, but it took 7.5 hours because there were 2.5 million people on that train track. And it was the cross-section of America and all of the major urban stations in Trenton, Newark, Wilmington, and Baltimore. There were Black Americans singing Battle Hymn of the Republic. There were whites in the rural areas who are holding up signs, "Goodbye, Bobby, pray for us, Bobby," American flag, standing, saluting. 4 years later, and they had supported my father in the primaries in 1968. 4 years later, in 1972, they were not supporting my father, and they were not supporting George McGovern, who was aligned with my father on all these issues. Instead, the vast majority of them were supporting George Wallace. And, my father was able to harness these.
I'm getting sidetracked, I should say, by the chat over here. So I threw it up there so you guys can see what's going on as well. But saying that Trump isn't legit, that his slogan, "Stop the Steal," is so that Trump voters aren't implicated. He's not exposing it, it's covering it up. So you're saying that he worked with the Russians so he'd lose? I don't see the logic there. How does that make sense? He's attacking the Uniparty now, so that no matter what, everyone else is the fraud and not him. All he had to do to get the Dems to investigate was say that his own votes could be fraud. Dems won't listen, and once the right hears it implicates Trump, they won't listen either. There's no way the Dems were going to investigate an election that they won, that they clearly won on purpose, which is why their candidate didn't even campaign. You don't need to campaign if it's in the bag.
Populist energies. In the last day of his life, he won the most rural state in this country, South Dakota, and the most urban. He was able to bridge the divide among people who would otherwise be Republican, but wanted somebody who was common sense, who was able to appeal to their idealism, who was able.
Did that girl Kim Taylor say who she voted for in her fake elections? I haven't checked into that case. I was thinking about doing a whole stream on people charged with voter fraud from 2020. I seen an Instagram reel somebody put together. It's like 7 or 8 different articles of people getting arrested, and I was curious to take that deep dive myself. It was her GOP husband that was doing it, and he somehow avoided being charged. Interesting. Kim Taylor. I'm gonna have to write that down. Kim Taylor. All right, we're definitely gonna check that out. We are going to check that out for sure.
To find the hero in each of them who is able to get them to transcend narrow self-interest and see themselves as part of a community and part of this, incredible American adventure in modeling self-governance for the rest of the world. And so I'm proud that President Trump likes me, even though I don't agree with him on most of his issues. Because I don't want to alienate people. I want to bring people together. I'm proud that all these people like me and that I have independent supporters and Democratic supporters and that I'm able to bring a lot of people. Every Democrat says, I want to end the polarization. But how do you do that without talking to people who don't agree with you? How do you do that without appealing to people? My purpose is to find the issues, the values that we have in common, rather than, focus on the issues and the personalities that keep us all apart.
As a lifelong Democrat, as you just said very passionately, will you pledge to support whoever the Democratic nominee is, whoever it is, whether it's you, whether it's President Biden?
Oh, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. No, of course I'm not.
So
listen,
if you don't get the nomination, you won't support President Biden?
I don't know what I'll do. Let's see let's see what happens in this campaign. Let's see, if people are living up to Democratic values and having debates and having discussions.
That's one thing that you got to respect about RFK is he just stands on what he believes. He thinks what he believes lines up with the Democratic Party. So he's running as a Democrat. That was the previous question. Why are you running as a Democrat? Do you think your parents would be Democrats nowadays? Yada, yada, yada. So he's standing on what he believes. And that stupid question, well, if you lose, are you going to back X person? Well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. That's a good answer. That's a good answer.
And, talking to each other, but I'm not going to buy.
And if you feel that's not happening, would you then support a Republican or run as an independent?
You know what? My plan is to win this election, and I don't have a plan B.
Okay. We are in Chicago, which will be the host to the Democratic National Convention next summer. It is also where President Biden came today to unveil his economic blueprint. He's calling it Bidenomics. The economy is a huge issue with voters of all stripes across the country. And that leads to our next question from George, a home builder and contractor in the Chicago area. Hi, George.
Hello. Everywhere I look, prices are sky high, from gasoline to groceries to building materials.
Facts.
Inflation and the uncertainty which it brings with it is damaging our economy. What is your plan to reduce inflation?
Yep. Thank you, George. I have a long-term plan and a short-term plan, but the current plan, which is to raise interest rates dramatically, and to end the quantitative easing, I think is really doing tremendous damage. I was in Cleveland yesterday meeting with African-American business people in a community called the Lee Harvard community. And one after the other, they were getting up and telling me, one of them was a woman who had operated for 4 generations, 80 years, a sausage company that was very, very successful. She just had, and it was bringing lots of prosperity to her community and lots of jobs. She just had to close it down because she couldn't get a bank loan. She couldn't get a bank loan because the interest rates are high, and the little banks, the ones that will loan to small businesses, their treasury bills have now been degraded in value, and they're scared about their targets for takeover. Their stocks have dropped 80% because of the heightened interest rates, and they're not loaning money anymore. And there's no money available to people who need it. And so, what we've done, we've sandbagged Americans. You're right. And why do we have inflation? We have inflation because of the continuous wars.
Wait, what specifically would you do to lower inflation?
Well, number one, I'm going to wind down the American empire and start. We've spent $8 trillion on the Iraq war and the wars that followed. And we spent $16 trillion on the pandemic, on the lockdown. The lockdown cost us $16 trillion, and we got nothing for it.
Gosh.
We got nothing for the Iraq war. We end up killing more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein.
But
we
I'm
created
talking
ISIS.
about what people are in the grocery stores tonight. What are you going to do to bring down the prices of the food and the gasoline that they're paying for, in the immediate future?
Well, the only way that we can do that is by reducing inflation. And inflation is not going to be reduced overnight. What we need to do is stop spending money on things
Correct.
that we can't afford. We're borrowing now $1 billion a day from the.
Until America could do what I need to do and cut up some credit card debt, they're going to be in the same situation I think that the majority of Americans find themselves in. We're swimming underneath. You know what I mean? So America needs to stop spending if it's going to get its way out of it. You can't spend your way out of a financial issue. That's retarded. That's dumb. That doesn't make any sense at all. You need to stop spending money on literally everything. We could turn this ship around real quick, like.
Chinese and the Japanese in order to fund the debt. The debt this year is going to cost us $660 billion, more than $500 billion just the service on the debt. We're not going to end that problem overnight, but we got to recognize that we've got to stop. We've got to stop. We're sending $113 billion to the Ukraine. The entire budget of CDC is $12 billion. The budget of EPA is $12 billion. Well, 57% of Americans could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency in their family. 25% of Americans are hungry. Oh, I have a friend who was on food stamps. He's a commercial fisherman. He's worked his entire life, worked to the bone, created a business, gave it to his son-in-law. And he was injured. He's on permanent disability. He was getting food stamps, $283 a month. And those food stamps are now worth a lot less because the inflation from paying for the wars caused 76% rise in dairy, milk, and eggs over the past 2 years. On March 1st, he got a robocall from the government saying that his food stamps are being cut by 90%. So he was getting $283 a month, which you can't feed yourself on $9 a day. He's now getting $23 a month, trying to feed himself on 80 cents a day. That same month, 30 million Americans got that call that month in March. Another
80 cents a day, bro. What are you doing? 2 top ramens, 1 for lunch and 1 for dinner? And drinking water? I mean, no offense to a homie's stepson that he built the business and left it to. Maybe that guy should be buying some groceries. I'm just saying.
15 million had their Medicare cut. That same month, we printed $300 billion to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank, and we topped off Ukraine at $113 billion. We have money, plenty of money for the big shots who need their bank bailouts, and for any war that comes along. But if you took that $113 billion that we've given to the Ukraine and spent it here, we wouldn't have to cut $1 from food stamps for that 30 million Americans. And we're acting like an alcoholic who's, behind on his mortgage, and he's taking the milk money and buying rounds for strangers at the bar and thinking he's making permanent friends. And all of these money that we're spending on the military is not making us safer, and it's not making us friends abroad. We spent $8 trillion on these wars in Iraq. During that same, and Yemen and Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Libya, and Syria, and that same period, bombing bridges, ports, airports, hospitals, universities. That same period, the Chinese spent $8 trillion building ports and schools and hospitals and roads. And they are now eating our lunch abroad because people love them in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, because they like them a lot more than sending weapons and holding a gun at their head. We need to change that.
And we have a question on China later on the show. We have a lot of questions that we need to get to. We're going to take a break, though, because coming up next, immigration and the U.S. border was the most frequently asked question we got from our audience. We'll have Mr. Kennedy's answers to that and much more after a quick break.
I'm curious what he feels about border situation.
Just want to leave.
He seems pretty reasonable and logical, so I would assume that he wants to fix the immigration process, which is what they all say. But does he want to close the actual border? That's what we need to know.
Welcome back. The vast majority of questions we got from our audience concerned border security. Mr. Kennedy, you were recently at the border. You toured it to get a firsthand look. You called it a dystopian nightmare and said that you would seal the border. And I want to go now to our first question from the audience, Josue from Chicago.
Hello, I'm the son of Mexican immigrants and the husband of a Honduran immigrant. And so my question is on immigration. With Congress unable to reach an agreement on comprehensive immigration reform in decades, what is your plan to address immigration?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and thank you, Josue. Is it Josue? Okay, I don't think that it's going to be possible to get an immigration reform package through Congress until we seal the border, because we've got now in the last 3 years, 7 million people have come across the border illegally, and the most disturbing part of me is I witnessed the humanitarian crisis, the cruelty to these people who are being brought to the border. They're being exploited, they're being extorted, they're being raped, they're being robbed. The cartels are now running U.S. immigration policy, and everybody knows that. There have been 9, we were told by the Border Patrol, there have been 9 suicides of Border Patrolmen in the last year because they're so demoralized about what's happening. They are literally, it took me 3 days at the border to understand what's happening. The first night I watched, I got there at 2 o'clock in the morning, stayed there until about 4, and I watched just hundreds and hundreds of people coming across. The first group was about 60 African men from West Africa, mainly from Cameroon. I thought I was going to see Central Americans and, Guatemalans and Salvadorians, but I didn't. We only saw, in the whole night, there was only 2 families from Latin America, one from Colombia and one from Peru, and all of them had been brutalized and every penny taken away from them. The rest of them were from Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tibet, Nepal, Pakistan, and many, many from China.
Facts.
The cartels are now advertising all over the world that there's an open border, and they are bringing people in. They give them videos about exactly what to do. They fly to Mexico. They're given visas there, internal visas in Mexico. They go from Mexico City on a plane to Mexicali. They're loaded on fleets of buses and then brought to the border. They cross. The only role of the Border Patrol is to stamp them in and check if they have a criminal record. If they don't, they are brought to the airport and they are given a ticket to any city in the United States that they want to go to.
Well, they have to demonstrate need and apply for asylum.
They're given a court date. And the court date is
everybody's let in.
Date. It's like an arraignment, and their real court date, which they're not going to show up to, is 7 years later. So they're essentially given a 7-year pass to stay in this country.
So how would you seal the border?
Well, you know what? It's not that hard.
It's not that hard. When they get in line, you say, okay, we're going to check you out, blah, 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 put you on a bus. When the bus stops, the bus is back in Mexico. And then you let them off the bus. It's not that hard, people. Just don't let them in.
As I, you know,
how would you do it?
I would do it. I mean, there's a number of things that you have to do. I was against Trump's wall, but having seen it down there, I see that you were required to give a physical barrier during certain, not all the way,
obviously
2,200 miles from San Diego to Brownsville, Texas, but certain highly densely populated areas, you need a physical barrier.
Correct.
But in the hinterlands, in the wilderness areas, you can use sensors like they do in Israel, like ground sensors and
There's all
towers.
sorts of AI breakthroughs too. But you would rebuild, you would resume the building of Trump's border wall?
Well, a lot of it now has been rebuilt. You know, Mayorkas, who's the DHS secretary, recognized that the gaps in that wall, that we shouldn't have left them. But it's not so much the wall, it's the other censoring devices that were all ripped up. You know, which I'm very embarrassed to say by this administration, by the Democratic administration. And also the policies were changed so that the presumption is everybody gets in. And I witnessed it myself. And we can't have that.
Everybody's not getting in.
Yes, everybody gets in.
There are crowds of people waiting to try and apply through the new app that the Biden administration has set up. They're setting up.
As for legal immigration.
Oh, you're talking about illegal immigration.
I'm talking illegal immigration. Everybody gets in. I watched it.
Everybody gets in.
People have come in. Just
This is what people don't understand. I did a couple of streams down at the border. I'm local to the border, the big, beautiful border, Trump border walls, 3 miles from my house. You know, a section of it that they built here. And I did a couple live streams from down there at the border. And it's every night. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds at a time, all night long. And the Border Patrol that I talked to and the sheriff's officer that I talked to said it's been like that for 2 years. I went down there after Title 42 was stricken down or removed or whatever, thinking that there was going to be an influx. So I went down there to capture, and no influx. Just steady. All 2 years of Biden administration. He said as soon as Biden came in, it's been a steady flow every single night. We do not turn anybody back. And then here's the kicker, which really pissed me off. He said Title 42 ending didn't change anything because we weren't enforcing it in the first place. That's why there wasn't a huge surge of immigration when Title 42 ended, like people were predicting. It's because they weren't utilizing it in the first place. Nobody was being sent back. Nobody was being turned away. Since Biden came into office, everybody that wants to come in is allowed to come in. No questions asked. We'll even pay you to do it. It's absolutely crazy.
One little section I was at in Yuma.
Crazy.
There's 350,000 people came here before, but I met with the Yuma authorities, I met with the hospitals, I met with the
That's where I am, by the way. I'm in Yuma.
The centers that take care of the immigrants who are, beleaguered. I met with the Border Patrol and the sheriff, and everybody agreed it could be stopped. It could be wound down to what it was before this administration, which was about 25 people a day, which is not a big problem. But having now it's 300 to 800 a day. And that, no nation can survive if they can't protect their borders. I would, as president, I will expand legal immigration. I will make it easier, particularly for workers to come across on the H visas, and then, and bring in and have an orderly system that benefits our country. Immigration is good for our country. This kind of immigration is unfair to everybody, and particularly to the immigrants that have been brought here. And then over the long term, the immigrants that have poured in from Latin America, a lot of them are coming up because of policies, wrongful policies that the U.S. has had, the drug wars, the austerity programs, the support of juntas, the war on the poor that we've maintained for so many years, and we need to change those policies as well.
You mentioned the drug wars, and fentanyl has been a scourge in cities and towns across America. 107,000 Americans died last year of drug overdoses. The vast majority of those people died from fentanyl overdoses. That leads us to our next question. Felicia is an addiction counselor. She lost her son 10 years ago to addiction. Felicia, hi, what's your question tonight?
We are losing the war on drugs. What policies or ideas do you have?
The government declaring a war on drugs is funny. It's absolutely funny. Because the CIA pretty much runs the drug and smuggling business across the globe. So the fact that we're going to have a war against the thing that we operate is crazy. Or to think that it's going to be successful or make a dent or a change is absolutely crazy.
That would change that? What's your platform on substance use and overdose? We need help desperately.
Yeah, and I have my own history of addiction. So I was an addict for 14 years, between starting one after my dad died till I was 28 years old, and I'm very active in recovery. I go to probably 9 meetings a week, and I spend a lot of my time thinking about it and seeing what works. And I take many people over my 40 years working these programs. I've taken hundreds and hundreds of people into different forms of recovery. And I have a very good idea of what works and a vision for what we need to do in this country. And we need to make addiction treatment easy, simple, cheap. A lot of the industry has devolved because of a variety of factors into almost a predatory industry, a lot of the addiction treatment industry. And I've seen how it works in other countries. I've seen this beautiful model that they have in Italy called San Patrignano, where there are 2,000 kids who work on a large farm in a healing center, and they grow.
It's a beautiful model.
It's good, and that's what we need to build here. And what I would do as president is I would decriminalize marijuana. I will make safe banking laws for people who are selling it, but I will tax it federally, and I will use that money to build these healing centers in rural areas, depressed rural areas all over the country, where kids can grow organic food and eat good, eat well, heal themselves spiritually, physically, and emotionally. And not only for...
Personally, I don't feel that legalizing it nationwide is good overall for society. But I think we're past that point now. We're past that point. So if we could utilize revenue from it to help fight addiction, I don't know. Decent plan. Sorry about the pause face. That's rough.
Fentanyl, but also for the many kids who are now stuck on SSRIs and are suffering other forms of depression. We need to start healing our country. Our country, has a form of kind of chronic inflammation, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. We need to start healing ourselves, and we need to be compassionate, but we need to be practical about it, and we need to make that a priority. We need to recover our children. We are all, one of my best friends lost a daughter 3 days ago. I lost a niece to a fentanyl overdose during the pandemic. So, I know what it's like. I lost 2 of my brothers. I know what the suffering that American families are enduring, and it is a high priority to me. And it's something that, for me, this is going to be my Peace Corps program. Like my uncle had the Peace Corps. I'm going to build these rehab centers all over the country, these farms, healing camps where people can go, where our American children can go and find themselves again and come back, become contributing members to our society, and stop the mayhem and the carnage.
All right, so that right there, That right there, folks, makes me go back to what I was saying earlier, is it might be a good idea, a strange one, but it may actually help the country long term, bring us together, unite, benefit us, actually get some stuff done that most people want done. Um, Trump should make RFK the VP. He can run with all these programs that he's talking about as VP, spearhead them, and get them going. But we don't have to worry about his Democratic policies affecting Trump's agenda. But the part of his agenda that I'm on board with, that I assume Trump's on board with, we let him loose on that stuff and let him go ham. I don't know. Seems like a good idea to me, folks. What do you guys think? Let me know.
So is it going to be something like long-term recovery being there? And
Well, you know, San Padrignano is actually.
Is it going to be federally financed? Yeah, who's paying for?
Oh, like I said, I'm going to decriminalize marijuana on a federal basis, allow the states to regulate it, continue to tax it federally, and use those taxes to fund the recovery programs. And I would do the same thing for psychedelic drugs, which I do not think should be criminalized. You know,
You would legalize psychedelic drugs?
I would legalize psychedelic drugs. Some form of legalization, but they should, you know, there's so much I know personally, and I know, you know, I've read the studies, and there's so many people being helped in different ways by them, and we have to make
lots
it
of benefits from them,
to prescribe them, to give them through therapeutically. I don't know about just buying them in stores. I have to look at all that, but in one way or another, we need to make it easy for people to use them in ways that could benefit our children and could benefit everybody. So I've seen it in my own family, the benefits of it. And I've been in recovery for 40 years. I'm a person who would never tell you that the answer is a drug, right? I'm a person who says, you know, you never can fix what's wrong inside of you with something outside of you, with a substance, a powder, a potion, or a pill. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it might be slightly different, though, when it comes to hallucinogenics, because that is something that you take, but it takes you outside of yourself. Therefore, when you come back to yourself, sometimes you fix some shit. Sometimes while you were out there, you worked on some shit, and you came back better. Sometimes you stay out there, and you're the quote-unquote glass of orange juice that happened to everybody who knew somebody, apparently, at some point. For the longest time, I thought that was a legitimate story that happened in the area in California where I went to high school. They used to tell people that there was an acid dealer running from the police, right, with 2 sheets of acid, and he sweated and absorbed the 2 sheets. And now he thinks he's a glass of orange juice. And if you tip him over, he'll die. So he's in a padded room trying not to tip over. This is a story I heard in high school. Supposedly a local story that happened, you know, a decade ago or whenever. And then come to find out, I guess this happened at a lot of places. It wasn't just mine.
But I have seen against everything that against all of my, you know, training and indoctrination in that area, I've seen miraculous recoveries from psychedelic drugs, from PTSD, from veterans who have used it, from
showed to work good on that.
Suffered severe depression, OCD, you know, many other injuries. And I'm not saying blanket legalization, but we need to make it easy for psychiatrists and therapists who are trained to be able to use this on their patients.
All right, giving the psychiatry field the green light to distribute hallucinogens, that is not the way to go, bro. That is not the way to go. part of your help healing the nation and getting the kids off SSRIs, whatever those mood stabilizing pills they're putting everybody on are called, is the psychiatry place, bro. Who's pushing all the pills? That's who's pushing all the pills, folks. We don't want to give them more authority to push more pills.
And, and see if we and experiment and see if we get good results.
We know that nearly 90% of people in this country who need help with substance use disorder don't get it, largely because they can't afford it, or they can't find it, or they're too afraid to ask for it. There's enormous stigma, which is a huge issue when people seeking help and getting help and finding help. In recent months, we've heard a lot of discussion about the son of the man you're running against, Hunter Biden. And I'm not asking about the questions about anything he might have done that was illegal, any crimes he may have committed, but I'm talking more about the way his addiction has been handled in the public dialogue. The fact that he's almost always labeled as, and I'm going to do it myself by asking this question, a crackhead. As a person in long-term recovery, as a member of a storied political family, I'm curious, and somebody who feels passionately about recovery and chipping away, I'm assuming, at the stigma surrounding substance use disorder and addiction. What do you make of the way his addiction has been bandied about?
Well, I'm not going to compound whatever problems that is by sitting in judgment of. I mean, people have addiction problems. I've never met Hunter Biden. I'm not going to put a judgment on him. I don't know anything about him other than the stuff I've read in the press. Addiction is a tragedy, and it
should never be weaponized.
It's cunning, it's incomprehensible, it's baffling, and it's really difficult to deal with. And I wish him and his family the best. God bless him, and I hope that he finds a road to recovery. That's all.
But do you wish that perhaps that wasn't becoming in some quarters what's perceived as a political weapon? It's, you can call for investigations until the cows come home, but to continually label and remind everybody that he was once addicted to drugs is like having that dragged out over and over again.
Well, I'm for de-escalating all of the poison and the hatred and the vitriol. So, whoever it is, whether it's against, President Trump or President Biden, you won't hear me saying bad things about President Biden. I like President Biden. I've known him for probably 40 years. And this campaign is not about criticizing him. And I tried not to do that. If there's a policy I disagree with, like the war, like censorship, like the, lockdowns, I'm going to criticize those. But I'm not going to attack him as a man. And I'm not going to attack President Trump, because we've had enough of that. We need to figure out a way to start talking to each other and to start healing each other and stop, just hating on each other. This polarization is more dangerous, and it's been in this country since the Civil War. And we need to figure out, ways to start talking to Americans with whom we disagree.
All right. Well, there are many Democrats who disagree with you on the subject of vaccines. So coming up,
we're going to
take
with
some
that.
questions from our audience about childhood vaccines and your positions on that when we return in just a moment.
The best way to burn fat and get in shape. It's not keto with paleo.
Now, for the YouTube censors out there, because we are still streaming on YouTube, he's going into his vaccine section. This is him, okay? It's not me. Don't strike my channel. This is the guy running for president, okay? A Democrat. He's on your team. Democrat, running for president. All right? No strikes, people.
News.
Double the intro.
Welcome back to our town hall with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And Mr. Kennedy, one of the biggest controversies surrounding your candidacy is your stance on childhood vaccines. Nearly every scientific and medical organization, including the CDC, the FDA, the AMA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, all say you're wrong on this issue. This leads us to our very first question from our audience. It's Dr. Tariq Butt, who specializes...
I would ask you one thing, on what issue?
On childhood vaccines.
What about them?
And whether they ever cause autism or damage kids. They all say these vaccines have saved millions of lives.
Damage kids.
I don't think anybody has said they never have. There might be a child here, but overall, all those organizations say vaccines are safe and have saved millions and millions of lives. But let's get to our audience question from Dr. Butts.
Good evening. Eradication of chickenpox and polio from the U.S. and many parts of the world
Nothing
is
to
a
do with
direct
vaccine.
result of regular vaccines.
False.
Measles, mumps, rubella, and many diseases are preventable, and there is little to no evidence of these diseases in vaccinated population. Your vaccine stance is dangerous to the health and well-being of millions.
All right, I don't know what little script he's reading. He's supposed to be a doctor. I don't know why he can't spit out 5 sentences without reading. You look like a retard right now, for one. And everything you're saying is fully shit, bro. I think it's like 70+% of cases of polio found are caused by... I guess I should watch my mouth on what I say if I don't want the strike, huh? Let's let him say it.
Medical experts are deeply concerned about your message. How can we help you to come to the side of science?
What was the question? How can you help me come to my senses?
No.
No.
Side of science.
You are a very smart person.
Okay, so, I think most people don't know what my stance is on vaccines. I've never been anti-vaccine. And I've said that hundreds and hundreds of times, but it doesn't matter. Because that is a way of silencing me. Using that pejorative to describe me is a way of silencing or marginalizing me. My position on vaccines, I think, is
pretty simple.
Virtually every American would agree.
Pretty basic.
With my stance on vaccines, which is that vaccines should be tested like other medicines. They should be safety tested.
What a crazy stance.
Unfortunately, vaccines are not safety tested. They're not. Of the 72 vaccine doses now mandated, essentially mandated, they're recommended, but they're really mandated, for American children. None of them, not one, has ever been subject to a pre-licensing placebo-controlled trial.
Yes, they have.
No.
Yes, they have.
Okay, let me just say something.
No, they haven't.
Fauci and many other people for many years said this, that Bobby Kennedy, when he says that, is wrong. So I met with Dr. Fauci in 2016, and I agreed to go on Trump's Vaccine Safety Commission, and I was with Aaron Siri and Lynn Redwood and a number of other people, and we said to him, can you show us one test from any vaccine, pre-licensing safety test? And he said, I'll send it to you. I can't find one now. He never did. So we sued him. We sued Aaron Siri and I sued HHS. And after a year of litigation and stonewalling, they said that they could not provide a single safety study for any vaccine that is on the childhood schedule, pre-licensing safety study. So anybody who wants to read that can go.
All right, just for the people in the back, I want to hear this again. We want to hear this again, people. We want to hear this again. I want you all to take note, write it down, do what you got to do.
After a year of litigation and stonewalling, they said that they could not provide a single safety study for any vaccine that is on the childhood schedule, pre-licensing safety study. So anybody who wants to read that can go to to the Children's Health Defense website, and you can read HHS's admission that not a single one has ever been safety tested pre-licensing. Now, what I've said is other medicines are required to do that. And we should have to do that for vaccines. If I'm wrong, show me the test, show me the study. You won't be able to, because there are none. That means that we don't know what the long-term risks are, the risk profile of those products. And I'll give you mentioned chickenpox. So when CDC was thinking of recommending this chickenpox vaccine as mandating for children. They did a study, and the scientist they hired to do that study was a scientist called Gary Goldman, a contract scientist. And he did the study in an isolated place in California called Antelope Valley, a long-term study. And what they find is if you give the chickenpox vaccine, mass vaccinate with chickenpox, it stops chickenpox, but it causes shingles epidemics later on, which are 20 times as deadly as chickenpox. So if you go, nevertheless, despite those studies, we mandated for American children in this country. In Europe, they don't. If you go to the British National Health Service website right now, you can read on that where they say, we do not recommend chickenpox vaccines because it causes shingles epidemics later on. And that's the problem. You can't just look at, you can say that this product is going to prevent this particular disease, but you have to look at the long-term impacts. Vaccines, like other medicines, have injuries that have long diagnostic horizons and long incubation periods that if you do not do long-term studies on them, placebo-controlled studies, comparing vaccinated populations to unvaccinated populations, you won't do it. Let me just give you one quick other example. The most popular vaccine in the world is the DTP vaccine, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis.
From my understanding, that's the most harmful one as well.
We banned it. We got rid of it in this country because it was causing injuries, brain injuries, severe brain injuries, or death to 1 in every 300 children. We used it in the 80s, and that's why there was all this litigation against vaccine companies that precipitated the passage of the Vaccine Act that then gave them immunity from liability. But in Europe, they don't use it. In America, they don't use it. But we give it to 161 million African children a year. So Bill Gates asked the Danish government to support that program and said it saved 30 million lives. The Danish government said, show us the data. He wasn't able to. So they went to Africa and did their own studies. And they looked at 30 years of DTP data. And what they found shocked them all. They found that girls who got the DTP were dying at 10 times the rate of unvaccinated girls. But they were dying of things that nobody had ever associated with the vaccine. They were dying of diphtheria, of anemia, malaria, bilharzia, pulmonary disease, respiratory disease, and pneumonia. And nobody noticed for 30 years that it was the vaccinated girls and not the unvaccinated girls that were dying. And what had happened is these girls were not dying of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. The vaccine had protected them against those, but it had also ruined their immune systems. And they were unable to defend themselves against other just minor diseases that other kids who had hardy immune systems were able to fend off. So that's why you need these long-term studies. And that's why I'm worried that we don't do that here in the United States.
And we do have evidence of that, like there are clinical trials, randomized trial, and there's a difference between association and causation, right? Somebody can take a medication and get involved in a motor vehicle accident. It doesn't mean that, that is associated, but it was not caused by medication unless we get to the bottom of it. So many times we should continue to figure out ways to, for the safety of vaccines, of course, and medical community is always looking for that. But at the same time, like we
That's the point. There's no safety. That's his whole argument. Dr. Butt. Your fucking name is Dr. Butt, dude. Oh, God.
can really come to agreement that vaccines are important. They do prevent those diseases. After all, smallpox was in the world, all around the world. It's not there anymore. So there is evidence of that.
Then there's diseases, when we passed the Vaccine Act, when I was a kid, there was only 3 vaccines, and I was compliant. But when we passed the Vaccine Act, it made vaccines very, very valuable. And all of a sudden, there was a gold rush to add a lot of new vaccines to the schedule for diseases that aren't even casually contagious, like rotavirus, like Hepatitis B, why are we giving hepatitis B vaccine to a 1-day-old child?
Right.
Hepatitis B,
They're not a junkie.
you know,
They're
the
one.
major vectors for
One
that
day, I mean.
are it's sexually transmitted or by needles. Why would you give that to a 1-day-old child? It's really a profit motive. Now, you're right that correlation is not causation, but the Institute of Medicine has looked at the vaccine schedule and said in their 2011 report, there are over 150 injuries that are likely to be associated with vaccines that have never been studied. So it's the CDC's responsibility to do those studies, and they've been ordered again and again and again to do them, and they have refused. And that's wrong. We need an agency that is putting public health first and not pharmaceutical profit. You were talking about the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis, you know, started with the oxycodone. Now it's, you know, fentanyl. But the same companies that got the FDA to lie to us about the addictiveness, lie to every doctor in this country about the addictiveness of oxycodone and get a whole generation addicted. Those are the same companies that make these, you know, other products.
And to think that they're not lying to you about the vaccines that's lunacy. That is lunacy. They're liars, but not about that. I mean, they lie and steal and cheat, but not about that. That's crazy.
And the 4 companies that make vaccines in this country, Merck, Sanofi, Glaxo, and Pfizer, have paid over $35 billion in criminal penalties over the past decade for lying to doctors, for falsifying science, for defrauding regulators. And we need to keep an eye on them. We can't just trust them. If they say it's a vaccine, you know, we all trust it. We need to.
This girl right here, I hope you guys can see my mouse. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. But this girl right here with the platinum blonde hair, she's having a red pill moment. That's what it looks like. Even though he's not converting her to the other side, he's still a Democrat. But red pill for the truth. This lady's experiencing it right now.
To have actual science on it, and I think that's all I say. I don't want to get rid of vaccines. If you want to take a vaccine, you should be able to do it. But we need good science, and that's all I've asked for.
But so,
Facts.
what do you say to people? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that every scientist, every government, our government, governments around the world, doctors like Dr. Butts are all lying about vaccines.
I've never said anything like that.
They're misinformed.
The AMA,
that doctor just stood up and said, well, there's all kinds of trouble. What do you mean? They're safe. Because they don't actually know. They're not tested. People go along to get along, bro.
The American Academy of Pediatrics, and the FDA says, and in fact, on its website, you can clearly see vaccines they go through 3 stages of FDA testing against double-blind placebos. They already do that testing for vaccines.
Elizabeth, no. You can say that. I'm telling you.
I'm not saying that. The FDA
no, the FDA is not saying that.
Yes,
because
they do on their website.
They will not tell you that that there's any vaccine that has ever undergone a long-term placebo-controlled trial prior to licensure. They will not, because it's not true. And you can go to my website and see where HHS says, yeah, there are none.
Well, we have competing websites saying different things.
Let me say this.
No, what's on his website is a court document because he sued HHS. HHS had to admit to the courts they ain't got shit. That's a little different than the FDA putting a paragraph up that's false. I don't know if you're aware of how many false FDA paragraphs have happened over the last few years. It's more than one. Let's put it that way.
I'm not saying the AMA is lying or the doctors are lying. What I'm saying is the FDA does lie. and the FDA lied to us about Vioxx. They knew that the Vioxx was causing heart attacks, but they let doctors believe that it was a medicine that was good, beneficial for headaches and arthritis without telling it that they were going to kill me. And they ended up killing between 120,000 and
But
500,000.
all these doctors and all these scientists around the world who say vaccines are safe and have saved millions and millions of lives.
The same people said Vioxx was safe. The same people said opioids, that oxycodone was not addictive because
And the same people say that Obama's mansion he just bought is going to be underwater in 5 years. But nobody believes that. Even Obama. That's why he bought the mansion.
FDA said it and they believe them. And that's the problem. We have a corrupt federal agency that's lying to the AMA, to all of those agencies.
Facts.
And all of the doctors, and they believe them. But those agencies are controlled by pharma. That is the problem. And that's what I'm trying to end as president.
Big pharma,
you know
bro.
that your own family doesn't support, many members of your own family don't support your position on vaccines. Your brother, your sister, and your niece have all written an editorial saying on vaccines, Bobby is wrong. His work on vaccines is having heartbreaking consequences. What's your response? Your own family thinks you're wrong on this.
Does your family agree with everything that you say?
Definitely not. You got me on that one.
Yeah, what do you want me to say to that? My brother doesn't believe me? Okay. Is he getting paid by pharma?
But it does tee up our next question from Kellen here in Chicago. Hi, Kellen.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for being here. As an undecided Democratic voter, I have a few concerns, and I'd like just to hear your thoughts on easing some of those concerns. We just heard about vaccines, that being one of them. Another one being that you have attributed a connection between 5G data and in quotes that it was designed, or that it will harvest our data and control our behavior, end quote, and that also.
Can I answer that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my concern about 5G is that the RF radiation from 5G is dangerous. It penetrates it disrupts the blood-brain barrier. It also is associated with glioblastomas and other cancers. And it causes a lot of other dramatic health effects. And there are literally thousands and thousands of studies in that. I've litigated on that issue and I've won in the Federal Court of Appeals. So, you can say it's a conspiracy theory, but the Federal Court of Appeals, I also won a case on Monsanto and glyphosate that it caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that was called a conspiracy theory. What I've said about 5G is, yeah, it is dangerous. It is underregulated. Other countries regulate it much better than us. And we need to protect our children. We should not be having these antennas on elementary schools. We should be warning people appropriately, do not put that cell phone next to your head. Because, we're seeing this epidemic now of glioblastomas, and almost all of them are connected to the year that you favor the cell phone with. Oh, there's study after study that shows that, and I'm in litigation on that issue right now. And, if we get a fair trial, we're going to win that litigation as well.
But again, you're a lawyer and an activist. You're not a doctor or a scientist.
Listen,
There's nothing more annoying to him than that question. I think I heard him address that specific point on Joe Rogan. He's like, look, as a lawyer, I'm not going to pretend I'm a scientist or I know science. But I do know how to read. I can read a study. You don't need to study to be a scientist to be able to read the scientific study and understand it.
We live in a democracy. We don't have a priesthood here. We don't have high priests who are telling us we're in charge of our own lives. And Americans need to do their own research. And, listen, people say trust the experts. That became a mantra during COVID. I brought over 500 cases, and almost all of them involved a scientific controversy. My job is to read science, to learn it, and to be able to read it critically.
Debate it.
And every case I've ever brought, there's an expert on that side and an expert on this side. When we brought the Monsanto case, there were 3 experts from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. And we had 3 experts from Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and they were saying exactly the opposite thing. Oh, saying trust the experts to me makes no sense at all.
Correct.
Trusting the experts is a function of religion and totalitarianism. It is not a function of democracy. In democracy, we question everybody.
We have a lot of questions.
Slow clap to that.
But before
Slow
we do, I want
clap
to
to
direct
that.
our viewers to our website to go deeper on the science of vaccines, as well as Mr. Kennedy's positions on everything from immigration to foreign policy. We have resources available for you online and encourage you to check them out at newsnationnow.com. All right, a big
Also
issue.
go to Children's Health Defense, and you can find the other side of the story. You can find the non-government science that often is paid for by the government, but then they deny and disavow afterwards. But you can read a lot more studies.
We have a lot more questions. A big issue here in Chicago and around the country is gun violence. And we have a question for you now from Nick here in Chicago.
So on May 30th of 2020, I lost one of my best friends, Chris Beatty, to gun violence. And also being a founder and CEO of a tech company that keeps people safe during marketplace transactions, I want to know, how are you going to use the federal resources to slow and or end the epidemic of gun violence in America?
Yeah, thank you for that question.
The federal government cannot end gun violence in inner city communities. I mean, the feds could put a bunch of National Guard in the community to shoot back at people, I guess. But the only people who can fix a community is the community.
And for me, it's a very tough question. And I lost my father to gun violence. I lost my uncle to gun violence, and many friends. And so I'm aware and sensitive to the injury that can cause to generational injury that occurs from guns. We have a gun problem in this country. We have a Supreme Court now that has given a very expansive view of the Second Amendment. And I believe in the Constitution, including the Second Amendment. And practically, I do not believe that there is within that Second Amendment that there's anything that we can meaningfully do to reduce the trade and the ownership of guns. And I'm not going to take people's guns away. And because telling the people that I'm going to take their guns away is not practical. It's not anybody who tells you that they're going to be able to reduce gun violence through gun control at this point, I don't think is being realistic. And I think we have to figure out other ways to do that. I think we have to figure out other ways to reduce that violence. And we need to.
You need to fix the reason the people are indiscriminately pulling the trigger on children and women and civilians. And why don't we figure out that? The gun is just a tool. It's the tool the demonic possessed person uses to commit violence. You could take if you could magically wave a wand and disappear all guns, people are going to die tomorrow. With bats and hammers and trucks and clubs and whatever else. The violence is the issue, not the tool used to commit violence. I don't know why we're still having this argument. But you can see that he is at least a legitimate Democrat. I didn't think they existed anymore. Apparently they do.
And ultimately, my hope is that we can bring Americans together, get them to trust each other, get them to trust their government again, and then we can work out, every American, whether they're Republican gun carrier or a Democrat who is, who believes that nobody should own guns. We all want the same thing, which is we want to keep our children safe and we want to keep our neighborhoods safe.
Correct.
And there are, I think we have to look at what the alternatives are for doing that. And, what some of the things I've talked about are that we need to look at some of the other causes of the violence. One is the division among Americans and the hatred. We need to reduce that. The distrust of government, we need to reduce that.
The SSRIs.
We also need to look at the contribution, particularly with the school shootings of some of these psychiatric drugs.
Yep.
And, I'm not saying they're causing it, but I'm saying there is evidence they are, and that evidence. Well, part of the evidence includes
all of them being on them.
The fact that for SSRIs, almost all of them have on their manufacturer's inserts among the listed side effects are homicidal and suicidal behavior.
That doesn't mean antidepressants caused any of these people to commit mass shootings in a school.
It doesn't. Of course it doesn't.
Okay.
But we ought to be looking at it, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we be looking at video games and cell phones and some of the social, some of the social media stuff? We should be looking at all these things, including the SSRIs. And by the way, there are studies out there that indicate a higher percentage.
I mean, to switch from drugs to video games, my guy. Yeah, video games don't cause people to murder people. That's not a thing. That's not a thing at all. Obviously, drugs that change the chemical balance of your brain and literally say on the side of the bottle may make you whack yourself or others. Maybe it's making people whack others. I don't know. It is on the side of the bottle. We're just saying.
To the people.
And she was just aghast. Oh my God, what do you mean? He's like, well, I just told you it's one of the side effects. So we should probably be looking at if it's one of the side effects. Because we know it's one of the side effects. It's like, what evidence do you have? I don't know, the fact that 100% of shooters are on them. They're like, but there's that one guy. Yeah, he was on him too, bro. He just didn't tell you. He was stealing him from his uncle.
Who committed these school violence were on SSRIs.
Yeah, well, there are also like tens and tens of millions of Americans on antidepressants who don't commit mass shootings.
Well, of course.
Correct.
There are people who smoke cigarettes and don't get cancer. So, but shouldn't we be looking? Shouldn't we be looking at those things? I mean, it's.
What a great response. There's people that smoke and don't get cancer. So that's why smoking may cause cancer. It's probably not even the smoking.
Something happened in this country. Something happened that we can't really explain and that we need to explain. And NIH really ought to be explaining it to us, but it doesn't do these studies. It will not do the studies where there may be a big shot as the culprit. Why, when I was a kid, many of the schools that my friends attended had gun clubs in them. And the kids brought their rifles to school every day. And nobody was shooting children. No, and in all of human history, in all of the nations in the world, there's never been a time when people randomly went into a group of children and started shooting them. Why did this suddenly start? Why is it not happening in Switzerland, which has, a comparable number of guns per capita that we have?
No, we have far more guns
we have
per
far
capita.
more, but they have a lot of guns, and their last school shooting was 21 years ago. We're having them every 21 hours.
We have a few more questions we want to get to, but very quickly, in 10
Do
seconds.
you believe that we shouldn't even look at that issue?
I want to ask you about the fact that you're running for the Democratic nomination and 77% of Democrats support an assault weapons ban. Do you not support an assault weapons ban?
If we can get a consensus on it, if Republicans and Democrats agreed to it and it passed Congress, I would sign it.
We are going
That's not
to
gonna
take a
happen,
break. The LGBTQ movement has a question on where Democrats stand and where Mr. Kennedy stands. We'll have that question for him and more in just a moment.
Okay, I'm curious about this question as well. Interesting.
The ancient Egyptians understood that they...
I don't know. I'm going to keep saying it, folks. I'm going to keep saying it. I think he should be the VP. Obviously, we don't want gun control. Obviously, we don't want some other stuff that he believes in. But his ability and his knowledge of going after Big Pharma, I think would be an ideal person to have in there to go after Big Pharma. Trump's got this new plan to investigate what's happening with the children health-wise. He would be great for it. He would be great for it. And you know how these political games work. A lot of the people running are just running to get national recognition. That way, when they're nominated to they get nominated to a position in the next administration, you know, they're just doing it for a leg up, so to speak. They don't actually want to be president. Not that they don't want to be president, that they don't really think that there's a chance they're going to be president. But you run and take it as far up as you can to secure your position for the next thing.
Welcome back. We have a variety of topics we want to get to and a variety of questions in our last few minutes from our audience. We're going to start with James from Charleston. He's a CEO of a social media consulting firm who has a question about the LGBTQ vote. James.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Mr. Kennedy, I have a question. You recently agreed and then withdrew that agreement to speak before a group named the Moms for Liberty. They are a right-wing group that would like to tell other parents how to do their own children, but you agreed to do that. You have mentioned your uncle and your father, but you've not mentioned Ted Kennedy, who I worked with in the United States Senate for 6 years, and his staff on these issues. There was no bigger champion or stalwart for LGBTQ equality than Ted Kennedy, the late Ted Kennedy, and you know that. Explain to me why, as a Democratic voter, I should ever support you in a primary against any other Democrat when you agreed to speak before a group that wants to ban my marriage and tell other parents how to treat their children.
I didn't speak in front of that group, and when somebody on my staff accepted that invitation, I was unaware of it.
I need to interrupt you for 1 second. As a former congressional staffer, if somebody who's elected blames staff, that's the wrong answer. You have to take responsibility for agreeing to speak before those groups.
I'm at the beginning of a campaign. I have no, long-term staff. We weren't allowed to even raise money until April 5th. So I'm scaling a campaign very, very quickly, and I accept a lot of invitations without the capacity to look into, and I know Teddy had, 86 members on his staff. But when, a member of my staff, through no fault of her own, I accepted that, and when I found out that that was their position, I declined to go. There's nobody, there will be nobody in the Oval Office who is more supportive of LGBTQ rights than I am. I was with.
I don't even know what that means. What does LGBTQ plus IA rights mean? What is that different than like human rights? I don't understand. What rights don't they have? No one's stripping away your ability to get married, which you didn't actually do, because marriage means something. And it's not what you're doing.
Teddy campaigning in the Castro in 1980. That was the first political presidential campaign that ever courted the gay vote. It's very important to me. It's a civil rights, as important as the civil rights to any other group, and their civil rights my family has stood for, has fought for, and I will do the same. I made a mistake by accepting that invitation, and when I found out those positions, I did not show up.
Thank you, James.
Would you denounce what they stand for? That's my question.
Excuse me?
Would you denounce what they stand for? Moms for Liberty is James's question.
I'm not going to issue a denunciation. I'm telling you right now, I don't agree with anybody who says that we shouldn't respect gay rights, or anybody else's rights.
We might have to look into Moms for Liberty after this stream, because I'm pretty sure they're Moms for Liberty, meaning they don't want the indoctrination of their children. Pretty sure that's their stance. I'd have to look, though.
If you're an American, you have those rights, and everybody should respect them. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that those are protected, and I always have my whole life.
James?
I'm so fat. Brendan, you're not fat. It's the shirt.
I do like his ability
Look at
to
me.
answer a question. I do like the ability to answer a question.
All right. Thank you so much for that question. We have another one from Hella, who's a retired patient care representative for a pharmaceutical company. She is in Manchester, New Hampshire. Helen.
Hi, thank you for being here. As president, what strategy would you employ to address China's recent ongoing negotiations with Havana about setting up a joint military training facility in Cuba?
What I will do as president is to de-escalate tensions with China. Now, I understand. When the Russians went to Cuba, they went into with their missile systems. They went there because we put missile systems in Turkey and Italy, as I said before. We now are putting bases and ships in the South China Sea, where we really and we're escalating tensions every day with the Chinese. There are people, the neocons in the White House, who want a war with China. And I believe that China wants to dominate the globe, but I don't believe that they want a war with the United States. We spend more on our military than the next 10 nations combined. We spend 3 times what China spends. We have 800 bases around the world. China has 1.5. Oh, I don't think China wants to compete with us. And it wants to compete on an economic playing field. And I am not frightened of that. I don't think that we can do it as long as we're spending 1.3 trillion on military and national security expenses every year. I don't think we can compete globally, economically. I think we ought to de-escalate, we ought to unravel the empire, and we ought to bring that money home, start investing in our industrial base home, investing in our middle class, investing in business. My grandfather always said, the power of a nation is not in its military, it's in its economy. And we need to build a robust economy at home, and then we need to project economic power, not military power abroad. And I think when we start doing that, the Chinese will also de-escalate.
The China, Xi has increased
That's dumb. That is absolutely dumb. That's the same argument where if we just move all our companies over to China so they can start making a bunch of money, then there'll be less commie. Did that happen? Did they get less commie? Really? I don't think it happened. Folks. That's naive right there. To think that China's just going to de-escalate their plans for global domination if we stop spending money on the military. Now, don't get me wrong. The waste and fraud in the military needs to be gone through with a comb as well. But staying the big and the baddest is definitely the play. That's the long-term play to make. Always stay the biggest and the baddest.
increasingly seen as militaristic by people who are China watchers. And the military budget in China has increased steadily over the last 10 years. It's dwarfed obviously by the American military budget, but many people feel like he is more militaristic. Does that not, do you not agree?
We spend 3 times on our military. Our military budget is 3 times what China's is. I think China does not have.
So basically what he just said is China is spending exactly as much money as we are on our military. Because our military and politicians siphon and steal off 2/3 of it. The 1/3 actually gets spent on the military. The Chinese number they're putting out is probably not the part they're stealing because they're commies. They don't really need to steal it. They could just take it. So the number they're putting out, they're actually spending on military. So it's probably fairly equivalent.
is a poor country next to the United States. They have their average income, their per capita income is about a third of ours. They want to build their middle class. They're not going to do that by getting in a war. They do not want a war with Taiwan. They don't want World War III. They don't want to fight the United States in a war. They do want to compete with us economically, and I welcome that kind of competition. I think it will be good for our country. It will be good for China. It will be good for the world. And let me just tell you something that we should all be thinking about.
They don't want Taiwan. They think they already own Taiwan.
We're on the verge of a new era with AI, with AI technology.
Huge.
And it is the most frightening threat to, or Elon Musk a couple of years ago, when I first started taking notice of him, he said that AI is going to first take our jobs, then it's going to kill us. And he wasn't using hyperbole. The AI, it has the capacity to do terrible, terrible things to all of us. The only way that we're going to prevent that is by bringing all the smartest AI people in the world into one place and negotiating treaties. We cannot afford to be at war with Russia or with China or with Iran. We need to be figuring out ways of treaties that make AI development and have standards that are transparent, that are enforceable, that we all agree on, and we're never going to do that when we have military tensions with these nations. We need to be working together right now, and it's existential for us. So, I think it's crazy for us to continue to meet every problem with a military solution. And of course, when you do that, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you make Russia or China a military enemy, it forces them to respond militarily. And what we'll do is as we de-escalate, we'll see whether they follow us. And that's what we need to be doing.
All right, our final question is from Dennis, who is now retired after a career with a Fortune 500 company. He's here in Chicago. Hi, Dennis.
Thank you. I'd first like to compliment you and applaud you for your courage of your beliefs. I really find it very admirable. So thank you.
For real.
My question is, given the polarized state of political beliefs across the United States, what are 3 things you will do in the first 100 days of your administration to unite this country?
Good question.
Most people have no clue that in 2023, the best
Good
way
question.
to make money on Amazon is not with.
I don't actually understand the argument, though, of unite the nation. Like, what does that mean? Is he gonna do something in the first 100 days that somehow makes the Democrats believe that we're not a racist country founded on slavery, who's been has a systemic, you know what I mean? Like, how do you dissolve the Democrats of this new, or I don't know if it's new, but it's definitely vocal. It's their talking points.
There's a lot of things I'm going to do during the first 3 months, but the major thing that I'm going to do is just be rigorous about telling the truth to the American people about everything, and having the agencies tell the truth to the American people, because the division in this country, I believe the real key to the division is that we're being lied to. When I was a kid, everybody trusted the government. Why? Because the government was telling us the truth. And in fact, the first time that the government...
And then the government killed your father. And a lot of people have said that's when we lost America, to the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy and military-industrial complex took over with that assassination that they planned and executed.
We ever caught the government in a lie was in 1960 when the U-2 went down in Russia, when the CIA's U-2 went down. And Allen Dulles persuaded Eisenhower to lie about it. And he did, because they didn't know that the Russians, that Gary Francis Power, the pilot, had not used his suicide device, and that the Russians had captured him. So they were holding him, waiting for us to lie, and then they produced him. And when that happened,
they lied to the Americans, thinking that the American captured would kill himself. And because he didn't off himself, the truth came out. That's quite the story.
And the American people said, oh my God, the government lied to us. Americans couldn't believe that happened. And now the government lies to everybody, expects the government to lie. 20% of the 80% of Americans believe their government then. Today, less than 20% do. And 20% believe the press because the press lies too. The only way we're going to start healing this country is if the government starts telling the truth. And that is the most important thing. I'm not going to agree with all of you. I'm going to differ with you on many, many policies. All I can tell you is I am the one president who's going to get up there, and I promise you the government is going to tell the truth to you. And I'm going to do that through national security orders. I'm going to do it through executive orders. I'm going to do it through example. And I'm going to, I'm going to make these agencies start telling the truth about everything. And again, you may not agree with me on some of my policies, but, our country is going to start healing when the government starts telling it the truth.
Twice. You did it twice. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you all to our audience. We're thrilled that all of our audience and viewers could be with us for what we hope is the first of many town halls here at News Nation. Here we trust you, our audience, and we believe there is nothing more valuable
That
than allowing
was
you
quite
to
the show,
access
folks. That
to
was quite
directly
the
hear
show.
from those seeking the.
That was quite the show. So, what do you guys think of RFK Jr.? What do you guys think? Obviously, like I've stated multiple times during the stream, I won't be voting for a Democrat because we don't trust them. We don't trust them. They've been lying to the blacks forever to get their vote and doing nothing for them. They don't seem to do anything. Well, I mean, not to put them above the Republicans also don't do shit that they run on that they say they're going to do. The only person that I've seen do that is Trump, which is why I support him. There's a lot of things about Trump that I don't like. There's a bunch of shit that he did that's not great. But he's the best for the job. He is the best for the job. But a phenomenal ticket. There's no way that we could lose, no matter how much anybody wants to try to cheat. There's no way Republicans could lose if he's the VP. If he's the VP. I'm just saying. I'm putting it out there, folks. I'm putting it out there because it needs to be put out there. I don't know what you guys think about it. I'm not sure how you guys are feeling on the situation. But Trump, President, RFK Jr. as VP, he can still go on his truth campaign, but won't be encumbered by being president. He can literally just focus on going after Big Pharma and going after the government corruption, which is the big part of his thing that I like that he's doing. As VP, he'd be in the position to do that, and he'd also get the support of a lot of Democrats and a lot of independents. So there would be no way that we could lose. There would be no way that we could lose. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys think. That was definitely a very good town hall. Excuse me. The announcer girl just dumbfounded and taken aback by a lot of the stuff that he said was just common sense and truthful. And she was just like, whoa, what do you mean? There's no evidence. Everybody thinks you're full of shit. And he's like, well, everybody's being lied to. So why don't they read the reports, actually check into it, and then they can see that they're ignorant. If they want to get the knowledge and then be dumb, let them. But for now, they're ignorant. And this is why they feel the way that they feel. So, interesting stuff, folks. Definitely interesting stuff. But I think we're going to call this end of the stream there for the day. I was thinking about getting into some other Tucker stuff, but you guys aren't very involved in the chat. And if you're not involved in the chat, it doesn't keep me motivated to stay on stream. So double-edged sword. Double-edged sword. We want to be here, but we want to be chatting. And if we're not chatting, we kind of don't want to be here, but we do want to be here because we want to get people to chat. Do you see the conundrum? I appreciate you guys. Take care. Until another day. Until another day. Later, later. Bye.